This is a painting of Lucy Fowler Gillett, who was part of one of the most prominent families in Westfield in the early 19th, throughout the 19th century. She had 3 children. She was the mother of Frederick Fowler, who was a prominent United States congressman and became Speaker of the House in 1919, right after World War I. And he remained in that role until 1925. So she was the mother of one of the most prominent politicians to ever live in Westfield. This particular portrait was done by Irene Parmelee, a very interesting artist in the late 19th century. She studied at Yale and studied with several people in the Hartford area, and then in 1875 she set up a studio in Springfield and maintained that studio except for one period of time until 1929. That period of time when she did not have the studio in Springfield was between 1881 and 1884. She, like many American artists of that time, felt that you couldn't really get the depth of education to become a great artist in the United States. Art academies, other institutions for learning about art, studying art, were just not that available in the United States. And so in 1881 she traveled to Paris, studied with several very important artists there in the Studio Julian, and stayed there for 3 years. This is not unusual. John Singer Sargent, Winslow Homer, several other artists did the same thing. They spent a lot of time in Europe studying art. In fact, people like James McNeill Whistler, after the age of 21, left the United States. He had spent some time in Europe as a child, came back to the United States, went to West Point, was thrown out of West Point by then Colonel Robert E. Lee, and then decided that since he wasn't successful as a military officer, he would go to Europe and become an artist. And so he left the United States at the age of 21, never returned to the United States, lived in Europe for the rest of his life. And this is something we see in many artists. And Irene Parmelee, the person who did this painting, is another example of an artist who spent several years in Europe studying art. And you can see the influence of European art at this time. She was there in the 1880s, which was the height of French Impressionism. Artists like Monet, Degas, Mary Cassatt, another American artist who spent most of her life in Europe, were developing Impressionism at this time. And you can see this especially with her dress. You can see the very loose brushstrokes that she employed there. Also, the very casual pose is something that was not very characteristic of portrait art in the 19th century, but here you see a more casual kind of pose with a very loose type of brushstroke, very characteristic of Impressionism that she must have seen many examples of while she was living in Paris in the 1880s. So this is a painting that we value a lot here at the Athenaeum. It's a painting that is one of our most cherished paintings and also one of our earliest paintings. So we're very happy to include this in our exhibit of the treasures of the Athenaeum.